Blog Talk Radio.
Let me make this an absolute fact. The goal is world peace. That must be our prime responsibility. We are the leader of the free world whether we want to be or not. And therefore we are the only ones that can preserve the peace. And to do that we must have strength. Meeting this mission is responsibility for preserving the peace, which I believe is a responsibility peculiar to our country, that we cannot shirk our responsibility as a leader of the free world because we're the only one that can do it.
For God's sake, I mean, look at her family. Yeah, look at her family, you know, all mixed up and everything. I mean, she doesn't know which way she's going, you know. I mean, so, you know, we're going to trust her making decisions there on the, and for this country, I mean, I thought I was going to support her when I read her background, but then when I seen her, what she was all about, and I said, oh boy, as soon as she came from Rome, that was it, you know, that Roman belief there, that Catholic, Jesuit background there, because they're part of that same thing as the Jews and whatnot in the New World. So, but yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you taking my call. I mean, I'll sit back and listen and appreciate it though. Yeah. What a maggot, huh? What a maggot that bar guy was. You could just tell with that round, fat head he had.
You walk into this room at your own risk, because it leads to the future. Not a future that will be, but one that might be. This is not a new world. It is simply an extension of what began in the old one. It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time. It has refinements, technological advances, and a more sophisticated approach to the destruction of human freedom. But like every one of the superstates that preceded it, it has one iron rule. Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silent, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship.
A part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. The consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN standard.
I had planned another closing message, but I feel compelled to say what I'm about to say. Now, I risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist, But it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government.
On the outskirts of the national capital today, black limousines with darkened windows converged on a hotel where private security guards imposed ironclad control. The limos carried royalty, political power brokers, and industrial titans to a secret meeting that will last all weekend. It's known as the Bilderberg Group. Could their objective be world domination?
Money from our treasury is now being spent for this effort. We will have a new currency and a new constitution modeled on the Soviet Union's constitution. Our rights will not be inalienable, but they will be granted by government, who can also take them away. This is terrorism of the most worst kind, brought on you by our own government. The strongest, freest nation in the history of mankind will be averaged into world communism.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order. It is a big idea. A new world order.
A new world is emerging. It is a new world order. The new world order is emerging. A new world order can be created. New world order.
The new world order.
New world order. The new world order.
The new world order.
New world order. New world order. New world order. A new world order.
And the hope that each of us has to build a new world order.
Движение в другом направлении, к новому мировому порядку.
I think even that does not describe why the world has changed so much and why the world has turned so much towards a new world order and a new kind of civilization.
France intends to proceed together with all people of goodwill around the world, this battle to build a new world order of the 21st century.
It's about the future of Europe and a new world order.
A new world order. The new world order.
New world order.
A new international order.
New global order.
President Obama and British Prime Minister Gordon today calling for a new world order.
Is this some sort of a new world order, which Gordon Brown kind of alluded to?
God is setting up a new world order, and his plan includes you.
In an era of globalization, of political interdependence, where the world is ever more swiftly opening up, and the cliché about a global community becomes an economic, political, often social reality. In this new world,
British Prime Minister Brown today declared a new world order is emerging. We want to know what you think, so our poll question is, are you excited that a new world order is emerging, or are you concerned about America's sovereignty?
What is this new world order all about? It is about a reversal of the American Revolution. American Revolution was a bunch of farm kids and get them working in blacksmith shops and working at other jobs, standing up for the greatest army on earth in places like Lexington and Concord and saying to the whole world that forever, no matter what happens, we Americans will decide here and decide for ourselves our own destiny. The New World Order is the reversal, the overturning of that revolution. That's what the end goal is. America's a rich province, part of their New World Order. But I give you my word, if ever I stand up on that east wing of the Capitol and take my oath as President of the United States, when my hand goes up, their New World Order comes crashing down.
in the near future, Earth is dominated by a powerful world government. Once free nations are slaves to the will of a tiny elite. The dawn of a new dark age is upon mankind. Countries are a thing of the past. Every form of independence is under attack, with the family and even the individual itself nearing extinction. Close to 80% of the Earth's population has been eliminated. The remnants of a once-free humanity are forced to live within highly controlled, compact, prison-like cities. Travel is highly restricted. Superhighways connect the megacities and keep the population from entering into unauthorized zones. No human activity is private. AI supercomputers chronicle and categorize every action. A prison planet dominated by a ruthless gang of control freaks whose power can never be challenged. This is the vision of the global elite, their goal. A program of total dehumanization where the science of tyranny is lost. A worldwide control grid designed to ensure the overlord's monopoly of power forever. Our species will be condemned to this nightmare future unless the masses are awakened to the New World Order master plan and mobilized to defeat it. Erected by a secretive group, the Georgia Guidestones are a testament to the elite's plan for a world religion, global laws, with a global court and army to enforce it. And set in stone, it is written that the population never rise above 500 million. In this film, you will learn how our world is truly governed. You will see how highly secretive roundtable groups interlock to form a global intelligence network. This group has been steering planetary affairs for hundreds of years. Now, in the final stage, they prepare for open world government. A goal tyrants throughout history have lusted after.
The concept of a New World Order has been around for centuries. It's been receiving tremendous play over the last half of the 20th century. George Bush, the first senior president, George Bush, used it a lot in his speeches and really implies that he really wants to see a order in which we have a universal or a global type of governance in which every human being on planet Earth is ultimately responsible for the policies that are being formulated at the international level.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
It's really always the same. You go back throughout all of history, the Roman Empire, the Soviet Union, Hitler during the Nazism was always saying that it's going to create the utopia for the average person, when in fact, history always shows that it does exactly the opposite.
Conquest and empire is as old as civilization. Babylon, Egypt, and Greece. They all built empires in an attempt to rule the world. The Roman system at its peak dominated the known world. Complex governmental systems were developed to control diverse populations. During the period between the 15th and 19th century, new empires emerged and again waged war for supremacy. The nobility, as well as the thriving merchant class, were financed by a handful of private banks. Many of the great money houses would hedge their bets and finance both sides of a war. Sophisticated intelligence-gathering networks gave the financiers a clear edge over the governments they were slowly gaining control of. On the 18th of June, 1815, agents of the British arm of the Rothschild family looked on as Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte fought desperately to save his army from the jaws of a British-Prussian pincer attack. A Rothschild agent was able to get the news of Napoleon's defeat at the hands of Lord Wellington to Nathan Rothschild a full 20 hours before the news reached London. Nathan, the head of the British arm of the Rothschild family, put out the rumor to the London Stock Exchange that Napoleon had won the war. Stocks plunged by 98%, and Rothschild was then able to buy up the entire British economy for pennies on the pound. When the news of Napoleon's defeat finally arrived, stocks soared. Britain was now the undisputed ruler of Europe, and Rothschild ruled England. The already dominant British Empire grew even more aggressive. Her troops and bureaucracy spread across the globe. The sun never set on Britannia's holdings.
The banking cartel funded, in fact, since about 1800, they have funded both sides of almost every war. And, of course, they're getting the interest off of the loans that they've given the various governments and the wars that they have actually helped stimulate and create.
By 1900, Germany was a rising force and a leader of the Industrial Revolution.
World War I, for instance, there was absolutely no reason to have World War I, except that it was an ideal opportunity for the banking cartel to make a pile of money by funding both sides of that particular war.
Armaments companies financed by Rothschild-controlled banks in Germany, France, England, and Austria bankrolled all the factions. At least 20 million were killed in the war. It was a conflict so terrible the people vowed to never fight again. They dubbed it the war to end all wars.
The question is, why did they want war? Well, first of all, is money and power. But secondly, they wanted to create the League of Nations. They had this in their plans all along, and as a consequence, once the war was over or about to be over, they began to formulate this idea of a League of Nations so this would never ever happen again.
Hundreds of years of practice made the British experts at hiding their empire behind puppet governments and councils. In the name of stopping all future conflicts, they proposed that countries would join a League of Nations. Their true intention was for the League to serve as a framework for world government. President Woodrow Wilson, who had spearheaded the establishment of the private Federal Reserve System in the United States in 1913, strongly supported the establishment of the League of Nations.
Woodrow Wilson was a very naive president. He was basically a college professor that was grafted into this whole system.
The League convened in Paris in 1919, but many nations recognized it as a threat to their sovereignty and refused to join. Frustrated by the U.S. Congress blocking the League of Nations, British intelligence, with the help of the Rockefeller family, set up the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City in 1921. The Council recruited the best and brightest of American life to support the growth of the Anglo-American Empire. The CFR's stated mission is to abolish all nation-states in favor of an all-powerful world government administered by a tiny elite. By 1930, the promoters of world government had split into two interlocking camps: the Fabian Socialists centered in London, and the Fascists based in Italy and Germany.
National Socialism will use its own revolution for establishing a new world order. Adolf Hitler.
Supporters of the fascists in the United States and England believed that the military should be used to quickly transform the world into a new world order. All the more sophisticated practitioners of globalism stated that incrementalism was the sure path to world domination. Congressional Medal of Honor winner Major General Smedley Butler went public in 1934, exposing an attempt by the robber barons to launch a military overthrow of the United States. The war hero testified to the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in Congress that some of the most powerful men in America had tried to recruit him to lead a military coup so they could set up National Socialism in the United States.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
The fascists had also made deep inroads in England. Edward VIII, King of England, was forced to abdicate the throne because of his public support for Hitler. In the build-up to World War II, and during the conflict, the bankers again financed both sides, just as they had done with Napoleon. With the rise and fall of the Third Reich, Europe lay in ruins. Once again, the elite claimed that only global governance could save humanity from certain destruction. And this time, the elite would succeed in setting up their world body. In April of 1945, at the Presidio Naval Base in San Francisco, the United Nations was founded by the victors of World War II. The United Nations complex was then built in New York City on land donated by John D. Rockefeller. Shortly after the elite established the United Nations as their base in the United States, the newly formed World Council quickly began work on the next phase in their plan, the incremental formation of continental superstates. The first step in their trilateral plan was the creation of the European Union. Unifying Europe had been tried many times and was extremely unpopular. Where Napoleon and Hitler had failed to accomplish their goals using force, the globalists would succeed using stealth. The British spearheaded the formation of the Council of Europe on May 5, 1949. The Treaty of London claimed to only establish trade ties between European nations, like NAFTA or GATT in North America. Its true intention was the formation of a European superstate.
A part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. Here are the aims for the United States. 1. Greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. 2. Higher and then much higher taxes. 3. An increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes. 4. Wild inflation of our currency. 5. Government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation. 6. Greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accompanied, naturally and automatically, by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. 7. Far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. There is a many-faceted drive at work to have our state lines eventually mean no more within the nation than our county lines do now within the states. 8. The steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education. 9. A constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare, the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace. Peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself.
1775, the American Revolutionary War began as the American colonies sought to detach from England and its oppressive monarchy. Though many reasons are cited for the revolution, one in particular sticks out as the prime cause, that King George III of England outlawed the interest-free, independent currency the colonies were producing and using for themselves, in turn forcing them to borrow money from the Central Bank of England at interest, immediately putting the colonies into debt. And as Benjamin Franklin later wrote, the refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators was probably the prime cause of the revolution. In 1783, America won its independence from England. However, its battle against the central bank concept and the corrupt, greed-filled men associated with it had just begun. So what is a central bank? A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this. By the early 20th century, the U.S. had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by ruthless banking interests. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rothschilds. And in the early 1900s, they sought to push once again legislation to create another central bank. However, they knew the government and public were very weary of such an institution, so they needed to create an incident to affect public opinion. So, J.P. Morgan, publicly considered a financial luminary at the time, exploited his mass influence by publishing rumors that a prominent bank in New York was insolvent or bankrupt. Morgan knew this would cause mass hysteria, which would affect other banks as well. And it did. The public, in fear of losing their deposits, immediately began mass withdrawals. Consequently, the banks were forced to call in their loans, causing the recipients to sell their property, and thus a spiral of bankruptcies, repossessions, and turmoil emerged. Putting the pieces together a few years later, Frederick Allen of Life magazine wrote, "The Morgan interests took advantage to precipitate the panic, guiding it shrewdly as it progressed." Unaware of the fraud, the panic of 1907 led to a congressional investigation headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate ties to the banking cartels and later became part of the Rockefeller family through marriage. The commission, led by Aldrich, recommended a central bank should be implemented so a panic like 1907 could never happen again. This was the spark the international bankers needed to initiate their plan. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at a J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge that the 10 or so figures who attended disguised their names when en route to the island. After this bill was constructed, it was then handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to push through Congress. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in, and Wilson in turn...
All right, everybody, Joseph Gibson podcasting here live. I understand the times in which we live today. I got a little bit of a late start tonight here to the show, but I do have another documentary I'd like to play here. This is a good one here. Actually, it's concerning World War II. It's a long one. Well, we'll start the part series off here, and we'll see how we go, and then we'll take calls here at the end, okay? 657-383-0616.
Winners write the history. Winners publish the history. Winners own the history. Most of us know nothing of what really happened in World War II. Most of us know only what the winners want us to know about that so-called good war. Never in history have so many people been raped. Never in history have so many people been tortured. Never in history have so many people been murdered. And never in history have so few people known about it. What happened to the German people, both during and after the war, remains to this day the darkest and best kept secret in world history. And now, this secret is a secret no more.
Ja, das deutsche Volk war ja damals eine Demokratie vor uns. Und es ist ausgeplündert und ausgepresst worden. Nein, was heißt für die internationalen Hyänen Demokratie oder autoritärer Staat? Das interessiert die gar nicht. Es interessiert nur eines. Ist jemand bereit, sich ausplündern zu lassen? Ja oder nein? Ist jemand dumm genug, dabei stillzuhalten? Ja oder nein? Und wenn eine Demokratie dumm genug ist, dabei stillzuhalten, dann ist sie gut. Und wenn ein autoritärer Staat erklärt, wir plündern unser Volk nicht aus, weder innen noch außen, dann ist das schlecht. In diesen Ländern regiert tatsächlich das Kapital. Sie reden von der Freiheit der Presse. Es hat in keiner dieser Zeitungen einen Herrn. Und dieser Herr ist in jedem Fall der Geldgeber. Diese Presse moduliert nun die öffentliche Meinung. Diese Parteien unterscheiden sich so wenig voneinander, als sie früher bei uns voneinander unterschieden haben. Sie kennen ja die alten Parteien. Das war immer eines und dasselbe. Nun müsste man doch meinen, dass vor allem in diesen Ländern der Freiheit und des Reichtums ein unerhörtes Wohlleben bestehen müsste. Es ist aber umgekehrt. In diesen Ländern der sogenannten Demokratie wird ja überhaupt gar nicht das Volk in den Mittelpunkt der Betrachtung gerückt. Was entscheidend ist, ist ausschließlich die Existenz dieser paar Macher der Demokratie. Das heißt also, die Existenz dieser paar hundert, die ganz das für einen Spaß gehalten. Sie lachen heute nicht mehr. Sie wissen, es ist ein blutiger Ernst geworden. Es war doch ein Kampf, besonders aber auch gegen das Volk, das in unserem Land schon fast allmächtig zu sein schien. Der Kampf gegen das Judentum. Eine satanische Macht, die von unserem ganzen Volk in Besitz ergriffen hatte, die alle Schlüsselstellungen des geistigen, intellektuellen Lebens, aber auch des politischen und des wirtschaftlichen in ihre Hand gebracht hatte. Und das von den Schlüsselstellungen aus die ganze Nation überwachte. Eine Macht, die zugleich auch Einfluss besaß, denjenigen, wenn notwendig sogar mit dem Gesetz zu verfolgen, der es unternahm, sich im Kampf gegen diese Macht anzuschließen und der bereit war, Widerstand dem Vordringen dieser Macht entgegenzusetzen. Das allmächtige Judentum uns damals den Krieg angesagt. Und wir haben gearbeitet. Was haben wir geschafft in den Jahren bis 1939? In eben Maß wuchs wieder das Leid. Der gleichen Männer, die damals bereits Deutschland den Krieg überzogen hatten. Sie haben Churchill begannen, sofort wieder zu hetzen. Sie wissen und dann natürlich den Juden an der Spitze, ein Orbelei, und wie die alle heißen. Sie begannen nun ihre Hetze, Jahr für Jahr. Man sagte allerdings, ja, er rüstet. Ja, das habe ich nun immer getan. Man hat mir früher auch gesagt, warum haben Sie denn dann eine SA? Wenn Sie den Frieden wollen, warum machen Sie sich denn dann eine SS? Wenn Sie sowieso nur die Brüderlichkeit wollen. Weil es Leute gibt, die das nicht wollen. Und denen wollte ich zeigen, dass sie auch für den anderen Teil gerüstet sind. Wir wollen nichts anderes als Frieden. Wollen nichts anderes als Ruhe. Wollen nichts anderes als uns unseren Aufgaben liefern können. Wollen aber auch nichts anderes als unser gleiches Recht. Und lassen uns nicht unsere Ehre und irgendjemand nicht nehmen. 1939 haben nun diese Westmächte die Macht gefallen lassen. Sie haben Deutschland die Kriegserklärungen geschickt. Trotz all unserer Versuche, trotz unserem Entgegenkommen. Vor 3 Jahren konnte ich das auch noch nicht ahnen. Vor 3 Jahren war ich traurig darüber. Und als der Herr der Polen plötzlich zu Ende war, wollte ich noch einmal die Hand zum Frieden bieten, der diese Gegner ja nichts gekostet haben würde. Sie wissen, man hat es abgelehnt. Ich war dann gezwungen, noch einen weiteren und noch einen Feldzug zu führen. Und ich habe es im Jahr 40 noch einmal versucht, wieder die Hand zum Frieden zu bieten. Es wurde wieder abgelehnt. Damit war für mich der Fall erledigt. Denn jedes Friedensangebot wurde von diesen Gegnern als Schwäche ausgelegt und daher eigentlich zu Ungunsten des Deutschen Reiches ausgewertet. Ich habe lautlos die Hand gegeben. Sie haben sie zurückgestoßen. Sie schrien auf, nein, nicht Versöhnung, nicht Verständigung, sondern Kampf. Und sie haben den Kampf bekommen. Und ich kann Frankreich und England nur sagen, auch sie werden den Kampf bekommen. Ich habe so auf die Hand geboten, es war umsonst. Sie wollten diesen Kampf, sie sollen ihn jetzt haben. Deutsche
process of the mountain is quicker, more pliable, and it's more exact and works much better. But it has to go through the process of the purification of the kind it is that for a holy soul to be revealed, there has to be holy genitalia and a holy mouth. And since the child can't do it by himself, perhaps the mohel, who is supposed to be a holy man, provides that ability of the connection between the genitalia and the recipient, which is the mouth, representative of the female. And that once the holy soul of the child enters through the process of the circumcision, because it says that the holy soul only enters the child at the moment of circumcision. Until that point, the holiness of the soul does not enter the person.
Es muss aber endgültig mit der Meinung gebrochen werden, als sei das jüdische Volk von
sunny day, is it any less blue just because the so-called anti-Semites said it was? This is usually the case with respect to these matters. While some people who investigated these matters were really anti-Semites, it was the fact that human sacrifice was practiced by Jews that caused many of these people to become anti-Semites. After uncovering the secret among the Jewish cult in times past, how could a Gentile feel otherwise? After all, it is not the anti-Semite who commits the foul act of human sacrifice, now commonly referred to as Jewish ritual murder. Yet Jews sought to make the Gentiles who reported these crimes appear worse than the Jews who committed them. Reports say children sacrificed in Jewish occult rites were tortured to death in the most cruel and heartless ways imaginable. After the ceremony, Jews reportedly dried the child's blood, often absorbing it into paper, for their various occult rites. Aside from claims of Jewish ritual murder being carried out in an extremely vicious manner, there's one other difference that sets this crime apart from others. When such crimes are uncovered, not only the local Jewish groups, but Jews from all over the entire world seek to conceal it. In the past, Jews have even set aside a special fund to cover up such acts. However, by doing this, they become, as the police might say, an accessory after the fact. From time to time, there have been brave and honest Jews who would deviate from their kinsfolk and admit to the truth of these crimes. While such honesty was not common amongst Jews, it still occurred on occasions. For this reason alone, a blanket indictment against all Jews cannot be made. Indeed, some Jews, young and old, have admitted these crimes in front of court, written about them in books, discussed them in debates, and so forth. For the most part, however, Jews typically deny such accusations. They have even developed a phrase for this type of accusation: blood libel. This term is often used as a rallying cry amongst Jewish groups. But let's go to the crux of the matter. When did it begin? And is there evidence to show that this has been a regular occurrence? Usually, when you think of Jews and human sacrifice, you will probably think of the incident between Abraham and Isaac in the Old Testament, where Abraham believed as God wanted him to sacrifice his son, until an angel supposedly appeared and told him otherwise. Many people erroneously believe that human sacrifice amongst Jews ended right then and there for all Jews. But just think about that for a second. Now, Abraham, here he is getting ready to sacrifice his very own son. Abraham reportedly stopped. But what about all the other Jews? Did they too? There is strong evidence to suggest otherwise. Children who were sacrificed were often burnt in a pit called a tophet. Drums were beaten in an attempt to conceal the child's cries. This practice was quite prevalent amongst Jews who lived in Carthage around 300 years before Christ and who worshipped Baal, another name for Lord. Even today you'll hear of a Rabbi Baal. Just do a search on the internet. When losing a battle in Syracuse, nearly 500 children were tossed into a burning Tophet as a sacrifice to Baal. Sometimes children were put in the arms of a bronze bull, which had a furnace below it, and those committing this vicious act then allowed the flames to consume the child. The level of cruelty in these cases knew no bounds. One thing that some may find rather odd is the key term used by Jews to describe their act of human sacrifice. They call it Holocaust. As surprising as this may seem to some, the word Holocaust is a Jewish word that was used to describe the act of putting a child into the flames as a sacrifice to their deity. Of course, Jews have assigned a completely different meaning to the term nowadays, but if you take a look at an older dictionary, you will see that we're right about this. Ancient historians such as Appian, Democritus, and Posidonius described instances of Jewish ritual murder. In 168 before Christ, Appian reported an intended victim, an adult, not a child, was found at the Jewish temple. Jewish historian Flavius Josephus disagreed with Appian's findings, which were translated and published by Thackeray in his book Josephus. Thackeray reported, Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining. The king's entry was instantly hailed by this man with adoration. Falling to his knees, he stretched out his right hand and implored the king to set him free. Thereupon the king reassured him and bade him tell him who he was, why he was living there, and what was the meaning of this abundant fare. In a pitiful tone and full of sighs and tears, the man told this tale of distress. He said he was a Greek, and that while traveling about his province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple where he was locked up. Finally, the attendants who were waiting upon him told him of the one unutterable law of the Jews, a ritual which was repeated annually at a fixed time. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner and then convey him to the forest where they would slay him, sacrificing his body with their customary ritual, eat of his flesh, and while immolating the Greek, swear an oath of hostility against the Greeks. The remains of their victims were thrown into a pit. In the first millennium of the current era, in the year 300, Bishop Eusebius of Caesarea said that Jews in all communities ritually murdered Christians during their Purim festivals. In the year 415, Socrates reported that Jews of Imistar bound a Gentile child on a cross and poked him till he died. In 425, Baronius reported Jews had crucified a child. In 614, the monk Antiochus Strategos reports that when Jerusalem fell to the Persians, Jews purchased one of the Gentiles who had been captured by the Persians and slew him like a sheep. In 1037, Prague, 6 Jews reportedly drained blood from a 3-year-old child. It was also discovered that these Jews had dispersed the child's blood, giving it to other Jews in Treviso. In 1096, a child by the name of Estrati was reportedly discovered having been ritually murdered in what is now known as the city of Kiev. He was later made a saint. In the year 1115, near the city of Magdeburg, Germany, on the day prior to Passover, ascetic Jews tortured 5 children and used their blood in occult rites. The incident was investigated, and the Jews were found guilty and punished accordingly. In the year 1144, an incident occurred to a child in England that would make history and the Jews not easily forgotten. It had been just a little over 50 years since Jews were first permitted to enter England in 1089. A small number of them had just been brought to England in an effort to assist the king with collecting his taxes. Consequently, as the town discovered to their dismay, a child by the name of William was ritually murdered. But what made this event different was that this child was related to an educated monk, Thomas of Monmouth. This event that occurred to William, like so many before it, could have eventually sunk into obscurity. But Thomas wanted to let the whole world know about this cruel and vicious nature of these wicked acts once and for all, probably with the hope of putting a stop to them. His book was written in Latin and was later translated into English in the 19th century by Dr. A. Jessup. Thomas of Monmouth described how Jews abducted the child. Afterwards, according to Thomas, this occurred. Having shaved William's head, he wrote, they stabbed it with countless thorn points and made the blood come horribly from the wounds they made. And cruel were they, and so eager to inflict pain, it was difficult to say whether they were crueler or more ingenious in their tortures. Thomas of Monmouth described the whole sordid event in detail, the abduction, the torture suffered by the child, and the bribes Jews gave to the sheriff, and more. Thomas's efforts to document this Jewish occult rite of an innocent child eventually resulted in the child becoming a saint. And he was remembered until modern times, until the church no longer permitted such politically incorrect facts to be known. Dr. Arnold Lees, who wrote a book about Jewish ritual murder in the early part of the 20th century in England, noted some interesting facts surrounding the ritual murders. A converted Jew called Theobald of Cambridge confessed that the Jews took blood once a year from a Christian child because they thought that only by so doing could they ever obtain their freedom and return to Palestine. And it was their custom to draw lots to decide whence the blood was to be supplied. The tragic murder that occurred to innocent William set a precedent. Because of Thomas of Monmouth's books that he wrote about the good child, others began to record these wicked deeds perpetrated by fanatical Jews. Some more of these reported victims follow. In 1243, in Kissingen, Bavaria, Jews were convicted by a court of law after having confessed to having used the blood of Gentiles for occult rites in their Jewish holiday of Passover. In the year 1255 in London, England, a young innocent Gentile by the name of Hugh was discovered to have been ritually murdered. His punctured body was found hidden on a Jew's property. After having reviewed the evidence, a court tried and convicted 18 prominent Jews of having committed the deed. The child was later canonized and became a saint. Altogether, before the Catholic Church became a bulwark for political correctness, there were over 20 children who had been ritually murdered by Jews and made into saints. In 1290 in Oxford, England, a Jew by the name of Isaac de Poulet was arrested for the ritual murder of a Gentile child. Perhaps this was a defining moment, as Jews were permanently banished from England a month later. Many of these Jews fled to Germany or other European cities. It was only after the King of England himself was murdered 4 centuries later by Lord Cromwell that Jews were allowed back there, although the edict officially remains in effect. In 1331 in Gubelin, Germany, it was said the Jews had murdered a Gentile child for occult rites. The Jews were found guilty and were punished harshly for this deed. They were burnt alive. In the year 1345 in Munich, Germany, Jews reportedly punctured a Gentile child by the name of Henry in more than 60 places, causing the innocent child to be bled dry. In Venice, Italy, in the year 1420, according to local records, Jews ritually murdered a child in a cruel fashion, and they were executed for this inhumane crime. In the year 1462, in the village of Rinn, Innsbruck, in Austria, Jews reportedly ritually murdered a child by the name of Andela on a large stone. The child became a celebrated saint, A church was built around the stone. The city even became known as Judenstein, or the Jew Stone. More recently, in 1997, Professor Robert Brandner of a theological college in Austria said this about ritual murders. He said, Jews should apologize for their deplorable crimes against Catholic children like the Holy Martyr Child Angela von Rinn, and against adults in the days before Easter, and for the blood of murdered Christians spilt by Jewish hands, which cries to heaven too. Jews became a little perturbed when the Pope met with Professor Brandner. In the year 1475 in Trent, Italy, Jews reportedly ritually murdered a child by the name of Simon. During the process, they also circumcised the child. This has also been the reported case in many other such incidents, although we don't believe it's necessarily a requirement during the bloodletting process. This child, too, had puncture marks over his entire body. The child was later made a saint. In the book Lives of the Saints, Father Alban Butler described the child as an infant martyr and describes the events surrounding his murder thus. The Jews in the city of Trent decided to vent their hate by slaying a Christian child for the coming Passover, and Tobias, one of their number, was deputed to entrap a victim. He found a bright, smiling boy named Simon playing outside his home with no one guarding him. Tobias patted the little fellow's cheek and coaxed him to take his hand. The boy, who was not 2 years old, did so, but he began to call and cry for his mother when he found himself being led from his home. Then Tobias silenced his grief and conducted him securely to his house. At midnight on Holy Thursday, the work of butchery began. They gagged his mouth. They held his arms in the form of a cross, while they pierced his tiny body with awls and bodkins in blasphemous mockery. After an hour's torture, the little martyr lifted his eyes to heaven and gave up his innocent soul. The Jews cast his body into the river, but their crime was discovered and punished. While the holy relics were enshrined in St. Peter's Church, in 1485, another Gentile child reportedly suffered a similar fate at Moristica. Pope Benedict XIV canonized the child, who became known as Saint Lorenzino, and mentioned the child as a martyr in his bull Beatus Andreas. The Episcopal Court of Padua, Italy, attested to the authenticity of this incident. Despite small differences, it is interesting to note that many other religious leaders have acknowledged these facts with respect to Jewish child murders. Cardinal Ganganelli, who later became a pope, once wrote, "I admit as true the fact of the Blessed Simon, a boy 3 years old, killed by the Jews of Trent. I also admit as the truth another fact, which happened in the year 1462 in the village of Rinn, in the person of the Blessed Andela, a boy barbarously murdered by Jews." The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther, founder of the Lutheran Church, briefly described his thoughts on this matter in his thesis, The Jews and Their Lies. In history, he says, therefore, they are often accused of poisoning wells, stealing children and mutilating them as in Trent, Weitzensee, etc. Of course they deny this, be it so or not. However, I know completely well the full, ready will is not lacking with them if they could only transform it into deeds in secret or openly. Know this for a certainty and act accordingly. In 1492, LaGuardia, Spain, a child by the name of Christopher was said to have been ritually murdered by Jews. Shortly thereafter, Queen Isabella of Spain issued an edict that banished Jews from Spain forever. And it was not until approximately 1967 the Jews were officially allowed back. There were many reasons cited for the Jews' banishment, such as overall wickedness, but one reason was particularly interesting. It was called a serious and detestable crime. Well-respected historian William Walsh argues in his book, Isabella of Spain, that this crime was that of the ritual murder of Christopher, who later was made a saint. In 1502 in Prague, a Jew was found guilty of having murdered a Gentile child in an effort to extract the child's blood. In 1574, Lithuania, in the village of Puna, the Jews reportedly tortured and then murdered a baby for occult rites. In 1598, in Lublin, in Kol, and Kutnia, Poland, it was reported that Jews tortured 3 babies in those 3 cities. When the incident came to court, all Jews who were involved in the matter were discovered guilty. According to the book by the Russian writer Dr. Vladimir Dahl notes about the ritual murders, he says, "It is difficult to determine how many Jewish occult murders reportedly occurred in history." Montague Summers, a well-respected historian, describes some of his findings in his book, The History of Witchcraft and Demonology. Closely connected with these ancient sorceries are those ritual murders of which a learned Premonstratensian canon of Wilton, Adrian Kemberer, writing in 1745, was able to enumerate no less than 250. The latest of these having taken place in 1650, when at Kadan in Bohemia, Matthias, a lad of 4 years old, was killed by certain rabbis with several wounds. In many cases, the evidence is quite conclusive that the body, and especially the blood of the victim, was used for magical purposes. In 1663, Krakow in Poland,
it's no joke. We were down there just trying to talk to people. What do you see here? Of majority of people here don't think like them. Yeah, I think we've found enough peace here today. It's no joke. I'm going to my car. I'm going to my car. Yeah. Jewish. I'm going in my car. Do you think the Lord would wish bad for others?
He doesn't wish bad for others. How many lands did he give the Arabs? How many Medina did he give the Arabs?
So that gives you the right to kill tens of thousands of other Arabs? Yes, you have the right to kill tens of thousands of Arabs and take over their land.
Killing them for fear.
The right of the Pharisee to kill anyone, just as long as he did so indirectly. The Talmud provides generous loopholes for adultery. It says the penalty for adultery does not include sex with a minor, the wife of a minor, or the wife of a heathen. The Talmud also encourages seduction of unwed adolescent girls called designated bondmaids. But it's important how such rapes are performed. With the designated bondmaid, one is guilty only in the case of natural connection, but not in the case of perverse connection. The Pharisees reasoned that rape in a perverted manner is outside the jurisdiction of the law. Normal rape, however, was punishable. In Babylon, sexual perversion of every kind had been a way of life for millenniums. The Pharisees were deeply influenced by such practices. In its article on Gentiles, the Jewish Encyclopedia begins to define what makes a Jew so different from a Gentile. According to the rabbis, only Israelites are men. Gentiles they classed not as men, but as barbarians. Since Gentiles are not men in the fullest sense, so the Gentile is not a neighbor of a Jew. Since the Talmud outlawed the child, or issue of a Gentile, as that of a beast, a Gentile had as little legal rights in a Jewish court as did an animal. The Talmud states that if a Gentile sue an Israelite, the verdict is for the defendant, the Israelite. Conversely, if the Israelite plaintiff, he obtains full damages. Because the Talmud conspires against Gentiles, if a Jew was ever caught telling a Gentile what the Talmud really says, such a person deserves death. So vile was the nature of a Gentile that the great Simeon ben Yochai said, "The best among the Gentiles deserves to be killed. The best among the Gentiles deserves to be killed."
preached revolution, said that Jews, as superior beings, were destined to rule the world. In the Zohar, which is the written text of Kabbalistic lore, we find the arrogance and ambition of the ancient Pharisees very much alive.
In a typical passage, the Zohar teaches, living soul refers to Israel, who have holy living souls from above, and cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth to the other peoples who are not living soul. Only by the overthrow of the Gentiles, the Zohar asserts, can Israel regain its position as God's Shekinah glory on earth. The Zohar, Gentiles Amalekites. In a passage typical of many, the Zohar says they caused the destruction of the temple, so when God reveals himself, they will be wiped off the earth. Redemption will not be complete until Amalek will be exterminated.
Began. Confidence burst to life anew. After years of hunger, hardship, shame, and degradation, Germany became a happy, full nation again. Germany's transformation from squalor and misery to a world superpower was so incredible that the 1938 Time magazine named Adolf Hitler Man of the Year. To many, it seemed as if a new cultural, economic, and political renaissance for all of Europe was at hand. But others throughout the world, envious, powerful, but above all fearful, now worked night and day to take Germany down. The Second World War was the most deadly and destructive war in history. For 6 long years, the unequal struggle pitting Germany against the world continued, with first one side, then the other on top. But at last, overwhelmed, Germany was once more defeated. This time, however, the Reich was to be punished not with mere reparations, nor loss of land, nor with simple decadence and despair. On this occasion, Germany was to be subjected to pure hatred. Hatred of the most vicious, evil, and depraved kind imaginable. Millions upon millions of Germans, many of whom had nothing to do with the war, were systematically raped, tortured, slaughtered, and all in the most sadistic and sickening ways imaginable. What happened to Germany and its people during and after World War II has remained the darkest and best kept secret in world history.
became known as the Blumenkrieg, the War of Flowers. Most of the Austrian people, envying what they saw as the economic success and prestige that Hitler had brought to Germany, now welcomed their German neighbors. From the German Reich. Bolstered by English and French guarantees of war support, Poland has no further incentive to negotiate in good faith with Germany, and in the meantime, in Warsaw, maps are suddenly starting to circulate, which contain a new western Polish border extending to just west of Berlin. All across Poland, the so-called pogroms against the minorities begin. Night after night, Polish border officials shot at the fleeing Germans. Shortly before the official outbreak of war, there were already 80,000 ethnic Germans in refugee camps in both Danzig and the German Reich. The misery of the minority Germans in Poland had now developed the third and most pressing reason that would lead to the outbreak of war.
Hitler now has a problem that Britain and France will declare war on them. At this point, Poland is actually committing pretty bad atrocities against the German minority in West Prussia, in the German part of Poland at that time. And so given that Poles are committing atrocities against the German minority in Poland, Hitler is now at a very tough situation. Basically, it's like, all right, if I don't declare war on Poland, if I don't go in and help these Germans out, well, then the German minority is just going to keep getting slaughtered. And it's not an insignificant amount of Germans in that area who were being killed. I mean, it was pretty bad what was going on, what the Poles were doing in that area. And so he was basically saying, well, if we don't go in, then those Germans are just going to keep getting slaughtered. If we go in, we're going to find ourselves at war with Poland, France, and Britain, and possibly the Soviet Union.
But in a move of brilliant cunning, he astonished the world in the summer of 1939 by doing a deal with Stalin. With Stalin on his side, Hitler was sure nobody else would interfere when he attacked the Poles.
The applause greets the few who have then survived in the full upper house to address the Reichstag, which has been called an extraordinary session.
Frankreich war und ist eine deutsche Stadt.
Danzig was and is a German city. We have only Germany to thank for their cultural development.
Wenn Polen versuchen sollte, auf dem Weg zollpolitischer Maßnahmen Danzig wirtschaftlich zu vernichten, dass dann Deutschland nicht mehr länger untätig zusehen kann.
I told the Polish ambassador 3 weeks ago that if the situation continued as it was, if Danzig were persecuted and it were attempted by Poland to ruin Danzig economically, the situation could not be tolerated.
Soldat des Weltkrieges, der ich nur im Westen gekämpft habe, nie kennen zu lernen, Gelegenheit hatte.
Tausende von niedergehetzten Volksdeutschen, physisch abgeschlachteten Frauen, Mädchen und Kinder. Unzählige deutsche Soldaten und Offiziere, die als verwundet in die Hände dieses Gegners gefallen sind. Sie wurden massakriert, Augen ausgestochen, bestialisch verstümmelt. Und das Schlimmste, diese polnische Regierung hat das in ihren eigenen Rundfunkern offen zugegeben. Das abspringende Soldaten der Luftwaffe ermordet worden sind und so weiter.
The women of Germany not only had to endure this onslaught of rape, torture, and murder, but also the humiliation of having it witnessed by friends and family.
These atrocities were not committed secretly or in hidden corners, but in public, in churches, on the streets, and on the squares. Mothers were raped in the presence of their children. Girls were raped in front of their brothers.
When even violated corpses could no longer be of use, sticks, iron bars, and telephone receivers were commonly rammed into their vaginas. Jewish commissars had a special desire to defile the churches of Germany. Soon after the fall of Danzig, hundreds of desperate females pleaded with an officer for protection. The Soviet pointed to a Catholic cathedral. After the women were safely inside, the officer yelled to his men, pointed to the church, and with bells ringing and organ pipes roaring, the horror continued all night. Some women and girls inside, some as young as 8 years old, were raped more than 30 times. Little boys who tried to shield their mothers were shot. When Soviet soldiers captured the city of Neustetten in February 1945, they discovered several large camps of the Women's Rights Labor Service, an organization composed mostly of girls who worked on various projects from nursing to street repair. After recapturing the area, the German soldiers were horrified by what had happened to the 2,500 females.
We had never seen anything like it. Utterly and unbelievably monstrous. Naked, dead women lay in many of the rooms. Swastikas had been cut into their abdomens. In some, the intestines bulged out. Breasts were cut up. Faces beaten to a pulp and swollen puffy. Others had been tied to the furniture by the hands and feet and massacred. A broomstick protruded from the vagina of one, a besom from that of another. Some mothers had to witness how their 10 and 12-year-old daughters were raped by some 20 men. The daughters in turn saw their mothers being raped, even their grandmothers. Women who tried to resist were brutally tortured to death. There was no mercy. The women we liberated were in a state almost impossible to describe. Their faces had a confused, vacant look. Some were beyond speaking to, ran up and down and moaned the same sentences over and over again. Having seen the consequences of these bestial atrocities, we were terribly agitated and determined to fight. We knew the war was past winning, but it was our obligation, sacred duty, to fight to the very last bullet.
While its men fought furiously in the east, Germany was also trying to stave off invasion from the west. Unfortunately, the invaders on this front often did not behave any better than their Soviet allies. Battlefield newsmen to the west simply did not report the crimes. As tens of thousands of German rape victims could attest, there was no safety among the American and British. Millions massacred, millions raped, millions already enslaved. But this was only the beginning of Germany's nightmare. When proud SS units surrendered, they naively assumed that they would be accorded respect as the unsurpassed fighters that they had proven to be. As soon as they were disarmed, most were slaughtered where they stood. For those members of the German military lucky enough to survive capture, death often awaited behind the lines, where thousands more perished. With General Eisenhower turning a blind eye to the Geneva Convention, only the threat of retaliation against Allied POWs still held in Germany did a massacre of prodigious proportions. Soon after U.S. combat soldiers moved out of a community and the rear echelon troops moved in, the reality of occupation became clear to the German citizens. The second wave of soldiers, wanting to experience a bit of war on their own, took out their aggression on the helpless Germans by looting, raping, killing, and destroying. In many towns, the invaders unlocked jails, prisons, and concentration camps and invited the inmates to join in the revelry.
They just opened up the camps and let them go. The Russians and Poles were looting the houses and killing the shopkeepers. Then they began raping the girls.
Similar mayhem engulfed most towns in Western Germany as Americans and British pushed onward.
Our own army and the British Army have done their share of looting and raping. We, too, are considered an army of rapists.
Was so good that he had the instruments playing and he wrote the notes, so later on we had a band who played over the weekend. And that was, of course, helping us. We also did plays and stuff.
Were there any cultural activities happening in Auschwitz?
Yes. I told you we had a piano put into, not just a piano, a grand piano was brought into Block 1. Once was built, that new block. The downstairs room was assigned for theater.
They said they're going to build a movie in the camp. And the president said, only you must be crazy. They're going to make a movie for us in the camp. And then what happened? They made a movie in the camp. Yeah, and we went on the barracks after a barrack. We could go to see a movie sometimes in the evening. They brought movies in the evening. And
what kind of movies would they show?
Well, German movies. Once I came to the main camp, they were allowed twice a month to write home. Once a postcard and once a letter.
Maybe the materials?
Yeah, they gave us the letter, the materials, they could.
You had money?
Yeah, we still got money. The money we got from the Jewish community from Vienna who sent us everybody some money.
And in the camp you could have currency?
Yeah, they could have money because there was in camp also what they call a cantina. And not many times, but once in a while they sold a few cigarettes or they sold something, whatever they had. So if you had money, you could buy in the cantina there.
Freddie Hirsch called me to the children's barracks. He was heading then, and he asked me if I could paint something on the wall for the children. And I said, well, if you can get the materials, he said, I'll get the materials. I said, okay. And then a very handsome young blonde man from the men's camp came over one day, and Freddie Hirsch called me to come and meet him, and he asked me what I need. So I said, well, if I can get any wall paints, so any tempera paints, I would like those. If you can get me some, and he said, yes, anything you want.
I know from years of my own research and the research of others that proofs of the Holocaust are few. Literally, all there is are the eyewitness testimonies and post-war confessions. There is no picture, plan, or wartime document dealing with homicidal gas chambers or a plan to exterminate the Jews. And we can't use the excuse that the Nazis destroyed all the evidence, because after we had broken the German code, we were able to intercept their secret transmissions, including those that came from Auschwitz. The key to understanding the Holocaust story is understanding the true nature of the things passed off as proofs. Everything that is used as evidence of the Holocaust also can be said to have a perfectly normal explanation. For example, these exhibits are said to be the material proofs of exterminations. There's the piles of human hair. But what does that prove? It's acknowledged that each inmate had his or her head shaved because of the lice problem. That's not denied, so why wouldn't there be piles of human hair? What about the piles of shoes and clothing? Is that a proof? It's a fact that the prisoners were issued a uniform upon arrival, including shoes. So why wouldn't there be piles of inmates' shoes and clothing? It doesn't prove anybody was killed. What about the canisters of gas? No one denies that Zyklon B was used to disinfect clothes and also buildings. Zyklon B was one of the premier pest control agents in Europe at that time. It was present in most of the concentration camps, including those that are not said to have had homicidal gas chambers in them. The typhus epidemic that spread throughout Europe during the war and also spread through the camps called for stringent lice control procedures. So what other proofs are offered? Well, there's the usual pictures of sick inmates, which proves the groundbreaking thesis that people got sick in the camp. Once again, I'll add that nobody denies the typhus epidemic, which resulted in many deaths. Then there's the artwork and the pictures of children. But at this point, it's looking pretty bad for somebody looking for objective proofs of the gas chamber. And some of the proofs they present actually work against the concept. For example, they have one of several aerial photographs taken of Auschwitz by the Allies during the war. They don't mention, however, that when blown up, these photos don't show people being gassed or bodies being burned, even though they were taken during the time killings were said to be going on almost nonstop. Once inside, we can see why revisionists have had such a field day with this building. Obvious marks on the walls and floors where apparently walls had been knocked down, equally obvious holes in the floor where bathroom facilities had been. We maintain that, unlike the large hollow chamber we now see, this room had once been 5 rooms, including a bathroom. Yet the building does have what appears to be evidence of criminal usage. 4 holes in the ceiling, which lead to the roof, where 4 little chimneys stand. It is said that through these 4 holes, Zyklon B crystals were dropped. And indeed, there seems to be no other explanation for them. Do these holes prove homicidal gassing? Revisionists have claimed in the past that these holes were added after the camp's liberation, and that the inside walls were knocked down and the bathroom facilities removed to make the room look like a big gas chamber. Let's start again talking about this building here. This
gas chamber.
But this is a reconstruction.
It is in original state. Original state. It is in original part. Original.
What is original?
Original in protect chimney was from Zyklon B.
Are those the original holes in the ceiling?
No.
They've been rebuilt?
Yes.
Okay. After the war?
After the war, yes.
Another question that should be asked Is there any Zyklon B residue in the gas chamber, knowing that cyanide gas would, in fact, leave a residue? In 1988, execution equipment expert Fred Lucher conducted forensic examinations on the gas chambers at Auschwitz to answer that question. He took samples from the 4 gas chambers at Birkenau, the one at the main camp, and a control sample from one of the disinfestation chambers that we know did use Zyklon B. Now, the gas chamber samples showed almost no appreciable traces, whereas the disinfestation sample literally went right off the scale. In 1990, the Institute of Forensic Research in Krakow decided to conduct their own forensic tests to see if they could refute Fred Lucher's findings, and their own tests got back the same results.
I told Mr. Zundel and his defense team prior to my going that if I did in fact find facilities that could have supported executions, not only whether they did support the executions, but only whether or not they could have sustained gas executions, I would make that very clear in my report, and that is what I would testify to when I testified in court.
What, aside from the samples, convinced you that these facilities could not have been used then or now as execution facilities?
You must have gasketed doors, no windows, means of getting the gas in, means of getting the gas out. If those persons operating the facilities didn't gas themselves to death at the same time that the executees died, they certainly would have been blown to bits when the gas exploded from a switch, the heat of a light bulb, or the gas approaching and getting into the crematory furnace. We're talking about brick and mortar buildings without heat, with non-explosion proof lighting, without gasketed doors, in some cases without doors at all, and with crematories that opened very close or adjacent to the facility. I mean, it's just ludicrous to consider that these facilities could have been used as gas chambers.
I think it's necessary to put this matter in its proper historical perspective. You see, we live in a time now when the old Soviet Union has fallen apart, and it's now okay for both liberals and conservatives, as well as everybody else, to speak ill of the departed communist state. But it was not always that way. During World War II, the Soviets were more than just a military ally. Their anti-Nazi propaganda was readily accepted by the other allies because it served all of their purposes. The point is that as the victors, the Soviets got to commit their propaganda to the history books as fact. With the 2020 hindsight we now have, the knowledge of Stalin's despotism and the KGB's history of misinformation and deception, as well as the other camps in Poland, Majdanek, Belzec, Chelmno, Treblinka, and Sobibor, we've had to rely on the Soviets for most of our information.
Don't interbreed of their own free will that, quote, it will be necessary for the Republic, for the government, to resort to even more forcible measures.
I think there's a resurgence of anti-Semitism because at this point in time, Europe has not yet learned how to be multicultural. And I think we're going to be part of the throes of that transformation, which must take place. Europe is not going to be the monolithic societies that they once were in the last century. Jews are going to be at the center of that. It's a huge transformation for Europe to make. They are now going into a multicultural mode, and Jews will be resented because of our leading role. But without that leading role and without that transformation, Europe will not survive.
White person watching this show, no intelligent white man in his or her right white mind want black boys and black girls marrying their white sons and daughters, and in return introducing their grandchildren as half-brown, kinky-haired black people.
I wouldn't object to that.
Well, you wouldn't, but a lot of them would.
Well, I think it's sad that that's...
It ain't sad, because I want a child to look like me. Every intelligent person wants his child to look like him. I'm sad because I want to blot out my race and lose my beautiful identity. You can do what you want, but it's nature to want to be with your own. I want to be with my own. I love my...
Americans are shocked, a lot of typically conservative Americans who are very much opposed to this mass immigration, which is transforming our nation into a third world country. They are very surprised to learn that immigration, the change in Americans' immigration policy and opening our border, that this policy was almost entirely led and affected by the Jewish supremacists. Almost every Jewish organization for the last 70 years, in fact, it took them 70 years, they started their work to undermine our immigration policy from literally the turn of the 20th century. So starting from around 1900, it took them 65 years. For 65 years, they worked to destroy America's demographic base, to make European Americans into a minority. And, of course, in my book, Jewish Supremacism, I quote from many Jewish leaders bragging about the fact that they led this effort. And, of course, they not only led it in terms of the actual congressional legislation, they also led it from the standpoint of the media, trying to tell America that somehow multiculturalism was a great advantage, that it was going to be a great benefit to people, when we know that so-called multiculturalism leads to greater crime, dislocation, racial insensitivity. In fact, racial tensions arise from it. That a community's sense of brotherhood and togetherness is destroyed by so-called multiculturalism. And when we look around the world and we see multicultural states, multicultural communities, they tend to be far more violent. They tend to be far more disruptive. There's a lot less love and a lot more hate in those kinds of environments because it's human nature. People are different. But anyway, the people who have been the architects of this change have really been Jewish supremacists. So unless we strike at that core ideologically, unless we expose this Jewish supremacist domination over our media and government, we're never going to have any real victory.
You see this same type of behavior over and over and over again in many different countries throughout history. They were run out of virtually every country in Europe, and out of many countries repeatedly, out of Portugal, out of Spain, out of Sweden, out of France, out of Germany. Germany, of course, was not unified, but out of various provinces in Germany over and over again. In Russia, they were allowed to live only in certain areas. And this was for a reason. It wasn't religious prejudice. It was because the people just finally got exasperated with them, and it caused civil disorder and unrest. And so the rulers said, okay, we're not going to put up with this anymore. Get out of our country. We don't ever want to see you again. We used to have a much stronger feeling of solidarity, a much stronger feeling of identity, of who we are as a people. A feeling of connection to and responsibility for our civilization and our culture. We used to have a pretty common set of standards and values. And so it was very easy when someone else, some alien, some outsider came along who had different values and standards, who came from a different civilization, he was immediately recognized, and he was considered an outsider. And he had a hard time getting inside and beginning to exercise his influence and take advantage of things. So any group of people who throughout history have consistently existed as minorities inside other majority populations and have tried to exploit those populations for their own benefit, have developed a certain survival strategy. And of course, this minority I'm talking about is the Jewish minority. They exercise a vastly disproportionate degree of control over our mass media of news and entertainment. That gives them the opportunity to change people's attitudes, to change people's opinions, to change people's values and standards, and they're doing it. And they're doing it in a destructive way. They benefit by breaking up this sense of identity and solidarity so that they can move in and they're not noticed as strangers anymore. They can take over. Nobody says, hey, you can't control this big city newspaper because you're not one of us. They get rid of that attitude, this feeling of identity and community and solidarity, and then they can move in and by cooperating with each other have a great advantage. This results not only in monetary gain, it's their survival strategy. It's what they've done for thousands of years.
Niemals erlahmen!
right, everybody. Joseph Gibson podcasting here, live, understanding the times in which we live today. Oh, boy. That was quite a documentary there. It was a little mix-up, half and half there between the greatest story never told and then the versus the New World Order there. So, and then play some stuff in the beginning there about the end game, about the New World Order globalist agenda there. I mean, well, what are you supposed to expect and believe? I mean, you see everything happening, spinning out of control. Nobody keeps their promise anymore. There's just that times have changed so much. And me not even being that old, but have seen already what I've seen the time I've been alive. I mean, I think back to when I was a kid. I had the opportunity to meet my great-grandparents, and, they were, in their 80s, and this is in I'm a little boy, let's say 1979, 78. So they're in their late 80s, so they, grew up during 1900, 1910, so, and they used to tell me stories how much things have changed during their time. So we're just moving faster to what in the end? I mean, the world is, the conflict that the world can, people say, well, there was wars, look at World War II. Yeah, but people couldn't kill each other like we could today. I mean, one missile can wipe out an entire state, So, yeah, they had the hydrogen bomb back in, but they didn't have them like they have them today. They didn't have long-range nuclear missiles like they did. But, it's, times are changing, and today we see in America is the last stand. There's no family anymore, no family unit anymore. There's, people are so hard to reason with, talk to. I mean, you have a conversation with them, it's an argument. You can't talk about politics, you can't talk about God, you can't talk about this. Everything's a touchy subject. Everyone is so easily offended that you can't seek justice in the courts and in the justice system. The politicians are all freaking liars. How many people are actually best friends with their next-door neighbors anymore? I mean, it goes on the list. I can go on all night long about what is not anymore from what we used to have, throughout our lifetime when we were younger. Things have definitely changed for the worse. They have not changed for the better. And you ever notice that things never change for the better? They never change for the better. I mean, I just don't see it. Yeah, we may get a good job or we may win the lottery or whatnot, but I'm talking about for the better and as a whole. Nothing really ever. During the Depression, families grew up starving to death, and they achieved. They got better. Things got better. Times got better. Not anymore. Not today. You don't see anything getting better, do you? I mean, so what are we really looking for? That one final solution? Is what they say in the Bible true? I mean, all the prophecies are being fulfilled as foretold. Oh, yeah, man's making it happen. No, man can't make it happen. So, I listen to idiots like that. But, it's things are definitely not going well for the human race here on planet Earth, that is for sure. And there's no talking to anybody anymore. And nobody has time anyway. Nobody has time to sit there and talk to you anyway. Nobody's got time. We're all running around, going here, going there. We all are busy. We got the best communication devices in our pockets, and we still can't get a hold of our family members. Tell me, what's wrong? Everything is about me. PC, personal computer. Selfies on MySpace or Facebook. It's all me. It's all inward, me. It's not about your next door neighbor. It's not about your son. It's not about your father. It's not about your family. It's all about me now. And that's a terrible way to live. I'm all about sacrificing for the next man. I believe in that. And it tears me up. Like if I work and I can't finish something, it tears me up that I can't do it. So, loyalty too. When you get into relationships or whatever, I don't have 8 girlfriends. I would never do. I never was like that. Some people today it's a normal thing now. Nobody gets married anymore. How many 50-year marriages are celebrated out there now? So things have gotten worse. That's for sure. And we got all the tools to analyze it, but we sure as hell ain't making any progress, are we? So let me check the phone boards here. Anybody wants to check in here real quick? We got a couple minutes left. 657-383-0616. I know we had about a dozen callers on there a little while ago. Show seems like it took about 5 hours tonight. Man, I don't know what the heck happened. But Let's see here. We got one, two, three callers. Okay, we'll go with the first one here, 205. Go ahead, 205.
Hi. I'm of the same mind pretty much that you are. Politics is such a voiced topic. I mean, it's just endless about politics. But, Thomas Jefferson said, God save my country from a two-party political system.
Yeah.
And the thing that we don't realize is that a lot of those guys back then were well educated, and they were familiar with the history of how we came to be here and the history of Europe. And Europe is basically in control of our country. I read the other day that we are actually under British law, Roman civil law, and Vatican ecclesiastical law.
That's true.
Which is very, very sad. That we've lost control of. I mean, I think it was, Benjamin Franklin said that when he in Philadelphia there, they asked him, well, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. And I don't know how true this is, but I've read that we haven't been operating under our original Constitution since 1871.
1879, or 1870. Excuse me. Yeah, the Reconstruction Act.
So you're familiar with that subject, then?
Oh yeah, I talk about it many times on this podcast. Many times I go over it. I was a part of the Restore America plan where I tried waking people up out there about the de jure and de facto system and the Federal Reserve and the monetary system and everything. And it took some grassroots and got large there for a while. But nothing. The evil, the dumbing down just has taken over. I mean, people just don't get it, or they just don't care anymore. I don't know if you see that too, but.
Well, I think that people don't know what to do. In other words, they may have an opinion, but as to, if anything is ever done, it will be from the bottom up. It won't be from the top down. I'm of the opinion that Thomas Jefferson could have said it this way: they're all in the same club, those folks up there in Washington. And, it's hard.
You're absolutely correct.
It's hard for us to think that way, but I'm almost 99% sure that that's exactly the way that it is.
Well, I'm glad that you're awake and you know what's going on. That's good. I mean, many people deny it, even when they hear the truth, but at least you see that now and you accept it, and you're like, wow, and I can hear it in your voice. But the fact of the matter is, go to a website, actually you go to republicoftheunitedstates.org. They outline everything you were just talking about the law and everything. And the de jure law is still there for us, we the people, to take back here, at least in America. And the thing of it is that, we can tell it and talk about it forever, but like you said, a key point, the founders were very well educated in the arts of war, fighting, tactics, hunting, and politics, and political science, philosophy. They were smart people, and we don't have. You go to the average teenager out there; they don't even know what civics is. So how do we save anybody? How do we save our republic when the people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge?
Well, they've been doing this. Well, Joseph, you're exactly right. They've been working on this for a long time as far as getting control of our educational system and the dumbing down process that they've implemented. This Common Core, it wasn't even common. The only thing that was common about it, it'd make everybody stupid. I can't believe we call this getting an education. I mean, obviously it isn't.
You're right.
I know a guy that was convinced. He was 27 years old, and he was convinced that he was smart because his teacher said he was smart because he knew how to use a cell phone. I mean, it's just, you know what I mean?
And I was thinking about inventing a class, actually, that taught people how to use a cell phone. Do you ever notice nobody knows how to talk on a cell phone anymore? When they're going down the car, their windows are down, you can't hear them, or they're breaking up, you know, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Joseph, when is your show every day, or?
It's every day, usually I did a late one tonight, but it's usually starts around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's usually when I'm on. I'm on every day now. I used to be only on a couple days a week, but I've been going every day because so many people have been calling in. I just did a late show tonight. I started off late. But, yeah, man, if you want to chip in, this is what we talk about, and we get a lot of very like-minded people on this podcast that have a lot of information to share, actually.
Okay. Well, I see that we only got a minute and 20 seconds here. I'm going to go ahead and go and let you finish up for the evening.
All right. So much. Thanks for calling in. I appreciate it. It's good hearing a voice out there. All right. Be safe out there.
All right. Take care. Bye.
All right. Bye. All righty. Let me mute that caller there. All right. There we go. Good. All right. Well, you know, it's good to take calls like that, and it's good to hear fresh voices also. Usually we get the same dozen or so that come on, but it's good to hear new voices. And there's always people listening. I mean, we got 20,000 listens out there, so, you know, yeah, restoring the Republic. That's what we're about. So until tomorrow night, I got to say, God bless the Republic, and be safe out there, and keep fighting and keep trying to wake people up, because we need more people like that last caller who know what's going on.
God save the Republic. Our fathers appealed to heaven. What did heaven do? Heaven heard. Heaven heard. Our fathers said they would treat all men equal. When they did not, heaven saw. Heaven saw. Our fathers fought each other and paid a great price. Father Abe kept the Union, but not the Republic. We forgot the Republic and placed our trust in man and suffer oppression. We appealed to heaven. What did heaven do? Heaven heard. Heaven heard. God save the Republic.